Hello, good evening, doctor. My name is Nur Amir, and I'm going to start my presentation for simultaneous interpretation. And I'm going to share screen for my slide. Okay. This is my slide, simultaneous interpreting, and I will go through first with introduction. Simultaneous interpretation is a method in which the interpreter converts and delivers the given dialogue of the speaker. The next is in simultaneous interpretation, the interpreter has to translate what was said within the time allowed by the speakers. In this statement say that all interpreters have to interpret what the speakers say and they cannot change the meanings at all. And the next is interpreter has to interpret what the speaker says at the same time as the speaker is giving the speech. Simultaneous is different with the consecutive, which is consecutive have times to take notes and break and they speak after the speaker's speech end. But for simultaneous, it's different because they speak same like the speaker speaks. So they interpret at the same time the speaker speak. So they have to be fast, and they cannot delay their time too much. They only have around like 10 seconds at least. They just can delay. And the next is the interpreter has to translate the thoughts and words of the speakers while he or still speaking, and they cannot like stop like consecutive interpreting and speak. They have to speak completely. Like the duration between speakers and interpreters is only like 3 seconds, and the interpreters have to say and have to speak the same like the speaker. Okay, next is the difficulties in the interpretation process. The first one, simultaneous interpreting is not interactive like the other forms of interpreting words. So simultaneous is totally different from the others interpreting words, and it's kind of difficult if you don't have a lot of experience or practice, and it's not easy to handle. Why? And the next is simultaneous interpretation is one of the most difficult forms of interpretation that brings with all kinds of difficulties and drawbacks that I mentioned just now. It's hard, it's not easy to handle if you don't have enough knowledge or you don't know what's the skills and what's the method of doing interpretations, simultaneous interpretations. And the next is in simultaneous interpretation there's are no breaks. No breaks means they don't have a time duration for them to break. So when the speakers speak, they have to speak. So when the speakers start speaking, they also have to start speaking, and there's no note taking in simultaneous interpretations. And the last is simultaneous interpreters must subconsciously do one thing so that their mind is free to consciously do another. They have to free their mind, and they can't think anything when they're doing interpretation, so it's not going to interrupt them, and they will deliver the message as the speaker say. So they have to free their mind before doing their job. Okay. The next is the interpreter skills. Having a good ear means that they must listen carefully about the speaker says. Sometimes the speaker can be slow and not clear. But this is what that means, having a good ear is, which is you have to be alert all the time. And the next is excellent cognitive, motor, and sensory skills, and extensive vocabulary in a multitude of languages. Which is, let's say, your target language is Korean and your source is English, and you must have an extensive vocabs in Korean so that you can interpret it correctly. And the next is culturally aware, which is you have to know what the speakers talk about. Is it about the culture? Usually it's the slangs. Maybe if like say he's a Japanese guy, and they have like speak based on their cultural language, and you have to aware about that, and you have to study a lot about it and learn about it more. And the next is stress coping abilities, and the last is emotional resilience, which is being an interpreter is like an actor. It's like acting. If the speaker is sad, and you have to follow the emotional also, like you have to change your tone and be sad. If the speaker is happy in normal tone, and you have to follow the tone and everything. You cannot change the tone based on your own because you have to follow all the procedures given, or you just have to follow all the speakers want. Okay, and the next is how to start the interpretative session and how was the experience of the interpreting session. Okay, the first one is simultaneous interpreting is when the interpretation is rendered almost at the same time the speaker is speaking. Like no gap. If the gap only like 3 seconds. Speakers speak, interpreters have to speak. No gap. Brain exercise, which is brain exercise is actually practice. You have to do maybe, let's say, you have interpretation session soon, and maybe you can do some exercise that's similar to your jobs, which is similar to your next session, and to make sure that your brain is completely adapt with the situation that's similar to your session. Yeah. And the next is not too difficult because I have more. The next is the experience I'm having while doing the interpreting session. It's not too difficult because I had more than ample amount of time to make preparations. Like I have a lot of time to finish this assignment, and I keep practicing, and I have a lot of videos, and I cut because I keep stammering and forgot some words and delay. So, but it's still difficult, but not too difficult if you keep practicing. Because keep practicing for the best results, and you can show that you are a good interpreter in the future, maybe. And the next is what were the challenges and what can be done for future interpretative sessions. Okay, the first one is process information very quickly. You must be quick, you must be fast. What was the delivery? You have to deliver as soon as possible so the audience are not going to be waiting for what was the interpreter will say. And the next is convey translated speech while the speaker is still speaking. Be quick in making decisions and show intense memory skills. You have, let's say, sometimes the speaker can say a lot of sentences, a lot of words in one sentence, and maybe you can forget. You might not remember what's the other words, and you cannot simply change it. That's why you have to be quick in making decisions, which is maybe from the long sentences you make it short, but not changing the meaning. And the next is the inability to understand the speaker. This can be the accent, the slang from the speakers, which is you have to understand it well. You must. The next is the what can be done for future in interpretive sessions. Background check before the practice is optional. Checking their background, let's say they must be at least like have an experience, or maybe they're in the study field of interpretation and translation or anything, so at least they know at least they have the knowledge a bit compared to zero knowledge. And the last is investment of good equipment. This is okay. And the last is the conclusion. Simultaneous interpreting can be a rather daunting task. And the last is active interpreting. An interpreter has to be active all the time because simultaneous interpreting can be in any situation, and they must be active and just be prepared themselves. So that's all from me, and thank you, doctor.